superficial electron treatments. This is really going to be more like a autobiography of sorts. Over the past 6 to 7 years, we've been working on this device. But we'll talk a little bit about the various treatment modalities that are out there. So, as far as any disclosures go, this presentation is about a device that we're in the process of creating. No financial disclosures at this point, although we are desperately trying to change that. And I'll also be discussing a little bit of the patenting and FDA clearance process that we're undergoing. And so I'm certainly not an expert in any of those things, as we are finding out, but I'll do my best to describe at least what we've learned over the course of this process. So a brief overview of skin cancers in general. This is primarily what we're going to be talking about. So there are 5.5 million cases of non-melanoma skin cancer that are identified every year. So this is going to be your squamous and basal cell cancers. And that's affecting 3.3 million patients. So these non-melanoma skin cancers are very favorable to radiation. They're very limited in depth. So typically they don't penetrate past 5 millimeters. And really, we've determined that radiation was an appropriate treatment modality for this right out the gate. So we discovered the X-ray in 1895. It didn't take too much longer, only 4 years later, where they were starting to treat X-rays, or treat superficial skin cancers with X-rays in Sweden. X-ray-based treatments in dermatology offices were very popular as long ago as the 60s and 70s, and even to the tune of half of dermatology offices having in-house X-ray systems in the 1960s and 70s. That started to fall out of favor a little bit in the 80s, Mohs surgery being the treatment of choice from dermatologists. I think a lot of these changes are probably due to some reimbursement changes, not necessarily the effectiveness of the treatment, but we're starting to see that rise in popularity again. A lot newer machines, different superficial X-ray options out there that have resurged, and the 2000s and 2010s, seeing a lot of dermatology offices put those in now. Again, some reimbursement changes that have driven some of that, and probably going to be seeing that pendulum swing in the other direction in the potential future. So in our particular instance at Penrose, not more than 200 feet away from here, we had a Pantech superficial unit, which was older than dirt, and it finally kicked the bucket in 2018. You can see that there. We had an old dental chair that we would use to position the patient with. And really, it was more of a boat anchor just in the corner of the room. But we did use it a couple of times a year anyway. A great solution for those hard to reach areas on the face and scalp, things of that nature. Once it finally did die, our physicians were really eager to find a replacement for that. So what were our different options? Obviously, we could buy a new superficial unit. There are HDR techniques out there, and then also unique electron solutions that we could investigate as well. And so we were kind of left in a lurch and with a ticking clock with our physicians, really looking forward to a new solution for those hard to reach areas. So my personal inspiration in this project, which I think probably a lot of people in the room share, I like to problem solve. I like to tinker with things, and most importantly, I'm very cheap, even if that's with somebody else's money. But some of the other inspiring factors as well, not just personal, but camp leadership has a really strong history of garage shopping ideas. Greg Gibbs here had a lot of our devices were built in his garage alone. And so this idea that we could take something from an idea and turn it into actuality was something that was really part of our lifeblood. So not only that, but we had a really strong partnership with the Penrose physicians. So they trusted us. They trusted that we were going to do our homework. And as a result, they didn't really shy away from some of the crazier ideas that we were coming up with. And then we also had a really good network. So external resources outside of just our camp brain trust that we could leverage so that before we really started using these things clinically, we would feel comfortable about them, go to some of the industry resources that were out there to us. So the existing technologies, superficial X-ray units, what's what we had before. Why don't we just get a new one? Some of the benefits. So I'll go over some of the pros and cons of these various options. So for these superficial X-ray units, very little lateral margin required. So anything that's in those superficial X-ray cones is usually getting prescription dose, really homogeneous dose profiles. It's tried and true method, really small applicators that you can use to get to the things on the face, the eyes, the nose, things like that. And it's really quick. It's easy to use. It's very efficient. Of course, the cons being that it's expensive. It's really a one-trick pony. What else are you going to be using this for? And you have a nice, big, expensive linear accelerator right next to it. And so it's just another piece of equipment to add to your repertoire in radiation oncology. The other downside is that it is using X-rays. So as opposed to particle therapy, there's this wasted deep dose radiation that you're not really able to take advantage of, even with it being a lower energy than some other modalities. Brachytherapy can treat small fields very effectively. Here's a picture of a surface applicator with HDR. It's also a good additional use of HDR. So if you have a unit that's gathering dust, you're only using it for your source exchanges, then brachytherapy is a good brachytherapy for the skin is another good way that you can exercise that. It's also, I think, relatively lucrative compared to some of the other treatment modalities, but it's very resource intensive. So for us personally, we already had an HDR, so navigating the RAML and the other components was not necessarily a problem. But for some of those other clinics out there, buying a brachytherapy system just so you can do skin therapy doesn't really make an awful lot of sense. It's also going to require a lot of investment, both financially and human resource-wise. There's some complexity to the dose distributions to HDR. I've not personally worked with some of these superficial applicators, so just kind of working off of what I've read anyway. But some of my understanding is that people will even mix and match HDR with standard electron treatments, so you can kind of leverage the best of both worlds. So it is a solution, perhaps not an ideal one. And then, of course, electrons. This is a tried and true method, very, very common. This is bread and butter for us in radiation oncology. Ideal to be using particle therapy, at least when it comes to the depth dose and where it's being treated. 3D fabrications, this is dot decimal 3D milled bolus, which is growing in popularity. So there are some better patient-specific modalities out there now, but there are some pitfalls to these techniques, particularly for what we're talking about here, where treatments at very small and difficult to reach locations can be very problematic. It's going to require either very time-intensive or very cost-intensive solutions, a lot of arts and crafts time to either build that bolus yourself. And even if you do so, there's still going to be some lateral margin that you have to bake in to the tune of 1 centimeter to 2 centimeters, depending, or you're getting really complicated with surface shielding. And so there's a lot of nuance into treating some of these places that are hard to reach. So again, we have some physicians who are waiting. They already had a solution they liked. We're telling them that we're smart people, we're creative people. Don't worry about it. We're going to get you something to look at here any day now. So really what we had started trying to do is just attempting to recreate the devices that we were already familiar with. So we had these superficial X-ray applicators. What are we going to try to do with them? And so why not use the X-ray source we already have? Our Trilogy had an X-ray tube on it. Why not try to leverage that in some creative way? They even posted this on the listserv, which got a lot of opinionated results.
Opinion of the year.
So, I think, that's the idea of the year from Rebecca. So my apologies, but it was well deserved. However, I do think that some people saw some creativity in there. I did get some fruitful information from that listserv post, but ultimately strapping a metal tube to the OBI on the Trilogy wasn't really something that was going to work out. So we pivoted pretty quickly and started trying to play with some homegrown HDR devices, which actually showed a little bit of promise. Also, another bullet point for me on the Idiot of the Year award. So I saw that the single source solution for the traditional HDR applicators was really simplistic, I think, in what its distribution was. And so essentially tried to create a little bit more of a robust distribution, playing around with some dummy plans and brachyvision, trying to find what's the optimal source to skin distance, things like that. And actually built something that unfortunately I don't have a picture of, but pretty rudimentary. I got some graphite from a Pinewood Derby kit and built a little box out of it. with some hot glue and put the prostate needles into there, and actually got, and this looks a little bit ugly, but like a relatively decent dose distribution for something that I literally made it just in the office back there. But ultimately, especially when I started taking some readings, I had some of the attenuation through the hot glue, through where the graphite meshed together. Figured out like this is probably not going to be wise to put on a patient. So went back to the drawing board a little bit and saw that our superficial X-ray cones really fit into like a 6x6 applicator on the machine remarkably well. So that's a picture of that's a 2 centimeter electron or superficial X-ray cone sitting really squarely into that 6x6 applicator for the Linac. And with the garage shop mentality, a drill press, a couple of trips to ACE, we were able to make something that would actually fit into the machine. We did have to remove the little red flange off of the machine and drill it down, kind of screw it down into the applicator for it not to trip any interlocks. But as a result, we got a really complicated 2 centimeter electron cutout, really not any closer to a solution. But from there, we were able to make a little bit of progress. So issues with small field electrons, as we know, as treatment fields shrink, the impact of alignment and fabrication errors, a lot of these are, at least at that time, we have 3D milled applications now for brass cutouts, but still a lot of these are going to be handmade with Cerabend. And so as you get smaller, the errors inherent to that process can have a bigger impact. Custom bolus, bringing surface dose up. Sometimes, like we're talking about, can be time intensive or cost intensive. And then there's a lot of wasted dose in those lateral margins. So with that cone that we had forged, we were able to fix this one part of the problem at least, right? We had a 2 centimeter circle, and that's going to be 2 centimeters every single time that you use it. But we didn't really fix any of these bolus issues, and we didn't really fix any of these lateral margin issues as well. A 2 centimeter circle is going to be really pointed in that dose distribution, and you're going to have an effective treatment width of just a couple of millimeters. So starting to come to terms with the fact that I didn't really do anything. And so trying to come up with a solution as to, accepting the fact that we really need to use bolus in some capacity. So trying to punch bolus into that cone, trying to figure out a way to still lay it on the patient, what was going to be the impact of that. I was getting really frustrated after a long day of trying to figure this out, and just threw the bolus on top, as you can see there. So that's that 2 centimeter, rather 2.5 centimeter applicator that's been drilled into the 6x6 cone, and there's just 1.5 centimeters of bolus that's just laid on top of it. So I figured I might as well start there and see what happens. And it ended up doing the trick. So at the end of the day, we just got super lucky. The bolus that we put on top essentially just did what you would expect it to do. It shifted that 6E electron curve. So that's that graph at the top right there. That's our 2 centimeter cone ionization curve. And so we're very much dealing with the same depth dose as you would for any normal 6E beam, except that it's kind of shunted off the top there. So that buildup is no longer a problem. It actually does kind of flatten out the treatment width there. So you have over 100% of the prescription dose drops to about 95% at 5 millimeters depth. And it also functions as a beam spoiler of sorts. So some interactions where you're causing those electron interactions pretty far upstream in the bolus, and it's having to travel down the length of that cone. Some interactions, some mechanisms within that are only theoretical at this point, give you what is really beautiful dose distribution laterally. So that's a picture of some film that we took at the surface underneath that 2 centimeter cone. I know that that's a little bit hard to see there. I don't know if it's mouse here, it's going to work, but essentially that's a centimeter to a centimeter of over 100% dose. If we normalize it to the center there, kind of peak to the sides, but you're getting prescription dose edge to edge. Anything inside of that superficial X-ray cone is getting treated. So some of the caveats that we found, and this is still, very much this garage shop solution. The dose consistency and patient setup were super robust, really easy to accomplish. Just put it on the surface of the patient's skin and you're ready to go. One of the caveats, though, is that the output factor was very, very low. So for the smaller cones that we had, it's to the tune of 5%. And so, of course, we're putting a ton of modern units through this device. But even with that kind of tremendous amount of modern units, the dose out of the field was still very low. No increased presence of a bremsstrahlung tail, which was an area of concern for us. But because of the fact that we're essentially dealing with something that we're drilling into an electron applicator and then manually placing bolus on top, that was an area of risk for us. We really had to have physics involved for every single treatment, at least initially. If for whatever reason we did not put that bolus on top, then that would have been a real problem. So the other caveat that we discovered over time anyway was that dose changed into and away from that cone. It's not super dramatic, to the tune of a couple of percent per millimeter. But if you have one of those bigger applicators and you're treating the tip of the nose, for instance, you wouldn't want that to be protruding deep into the cone because it's going to be a lot hotter inside as opposed to where we've calibrated it right at the surface. So these are some comparisons of our device versus some of the more traditional ones. So as you can see in red there, that's our electron cone. If we're treating these squamous and basal cell cancers, which you want to treat down to about a depth of 5 millimeters, we're getting 95% of the dose at that depth. And then, in comparison to that, for your HDR solutions there, you get 100% of the dose at the surface. But if you want to treat with any meaningful depth, you're going to have quite an amount of heterogeneity there. And then again, for the superficials, that does a better job of treating more uniformly at depth, but there's still a lot of wasted radiation there as you get to deeper depths. Whereas since we're dealing with particle therapy, the electron cone really craters after that 5 millimeters, so that you're getting very, very little dose at depth. And then in comparison, so this is what our initial superficial cone profiles looked like. So 15 millimeters at the 25. Those numbers again might be a little bit hard to see, but essentially that's not just a nominal value there. That's legitimately the treatment diameter that you're able to accomplish. And as you can see there, it's pretty much perfectly flat from edge to edge. And then in comparison, so if we were to look at, that's a profile from a 2 centimeter cutout that's from our old Pinnacle system. That's a 2 centimeter profile for a standard electron cutout. So even though it's a 2 cm circle, you only have 3 millimeters of prescription range. And then on the right there, that's from the Variant Bravos applicator. So a little bit of a better job on the treatment width, but there's heterogeneities of 20% right here in the middle of the field. So at this point, we have something that's potentially viable. It has been useful to us. It's also somewhat dangerous to use. So where we're going to go from here. We wanted to make sure before we went fully clinical with this, let's get some second opinions from experts in the field. So thankfully, Olivia was able to get us in touch with Ken Hogstrom, who's really the electron guru in the field. And his real feedback was you shouldn't call it bolus because it's not on the patient's surface of the skin, and have somebody else make this for you. So that's good feedback to hear. That's what we wanted. Sent out some questionnaires to colleagues of ours just to see what problems are they facing with treating these kinds of diseases. Would this be something that's of interest to them? How much money would they pay for it? Those kinds of things. Try to get an idea of what's the real viability of taking something like this and going on forward with the next steps. So Dot Decimal, we thought, was a real potential partner. They're already in this space. They're making electron-specific devices. It was actually who Ken Hogstrom has suggested we reach out to. And I think that they're a little bit nervous at this point. We just have an idea. We haven't really taken any further steps with patenting or clearance or anything like that. And they unfortunately weren't interested. Varian, really hard not to talk to Varian. Obviously, the really big player in our space, but electrons aren't very sexy, I guess. So they weren't interested either. And then RPD, radiation product devices, they actually were quite helpful. And one of the things that we did get out of that listserv post was apparently something very, very similar already existed and sold by RPD called the electron mini cone. So we reached out to them to see if there was some capacity that they might be able to help us out. It's actually here. They sent us something that mimics very closely what we have. And so I think it's really more for intraoperative things. You can see this thing just slides out. It's got this ball bearing track on it with, it has a gap in there. So if you're going to be delivering 3,000 monitor units through that, that's a really bad thing. So our physicians weren't too happy with the solution of adding just like a lead diaper to it, but it worked. And so they actually sent us this for free. And really the only difference between making this, making it clinical in the way that, was really meaningful was they made an acrylic plug for us to put into it. So really meaningful step towards getting to where we are today. Really thankful that they really just did that for us pro bono. But that was kind of the end of that relationship. And still, what are the next steps? Where do we go from here? We have a device that is we're still at the garage shop level, right? So we are now like 2 phases in. We've been clinical with this device, but still like that's a removable acrylic plug. Again, if we don't treat that acrylic plug, we're in real trouble. So really without any way forward, we just decided to find somebody to make it for us. Found a machine shop in town that we collaborated with, and really it's not anything more than an acrylic tube with the center milled out and left a little acrylic beam spoiler at the end there. And we're able to affix it to the cone with just standard Cerabend. So at this point, we have something now that is a lot safer. We're able to use it with confidence. It's a simple device. It's easy to assess if it's mechanically been compromised. And it's really impossible to treat without that beam spoiler in place. So now I feel like we have something, we can actually make it, we can distribute it, we can practice with it. At this point, we're able to make these electron cones and validate them. We created 5 different sets, and again, playing off of that, the relationship with our radiation oncology teams, they were adopted really quickly, a lot quicker than I would have imagined, honestly. And we, this is a couple of years ago at this point, but we've treated well over 100 patients. Our setups, we do in vivo measurements on every single one of them. The results come back spot on all the time. The doctors love them. The therapists like them. It's a really straightforward solution, but still, like, what do we do now? What's the next step? So we did decide to start looking at the patenting process. And this is really where, maybe there was some uncertainty before, right? But we have plenty of people to rely on. We were all physicists. We're still well within our wheelhouse. And now starting to get into some uncharted territory, I think, for our entire team. And so we had a lot to learn. It turns out that the timing of events for patenting a device is really, really important. So, there's a lot of encouragement from our physician partners that this is something that we should publish, we should get out there. I did present on the initial iteration of that cone at Winter Institute of Medical Physics back in 2020, and that turned out to be a problem. So as soon as you present, as soon as you publish, and it turns out using the process in any operation whatsoever where money changes hands, which is electron treatments, that all counts as public disclosure. So we didn't start this process until maybe 2024. And I presented it in 2020. And then we were using these cones this entire time. So really having to build the timeline so that we could prove that, one, this is different from the initial iteration, but also that we're still learning, where this is all experimental use. Because I had no idea that just using it clinically was essentially a public disclosure of sorts. So for you to know, you have 1 year from that time of that disclosure in order to publish your patent. They apply for that patent. You can file a provisional patent that gives you an extra year once you file that provisional patent. the clock starts again. I believe you can do that indefinitely, but that's also me speaking a little bit out of memory, not out of real concrete knowledge. And then the cost of this process is highly variable. Thankfully for us, there's really not much to this device. It's an acrylic tube. The whole patent application probably wasn't more than 10 pages. But if it's really complex, if there's a lot of predicate devices out there very similar to it, if you anticipate a lot of back and forth between the patent office and your attorneys who are hopefully doing this on your behalf, then it could be really time consuming and cost consuming as well. And then some of the things that to take into consideration are, what are the things that make your device really unique? What is it that you're really going to be wanting to protect out of this, but also making your application generic enough so that it will encompass a handful of different iterations of variations so that someone can't just change one little tiny thing and then file their own patent and compete with you directly. So we did do this process. We were successful. It really wasn't too onerous because of the simplicity of the device, I believe. Not a lot of competing patents out there. But then what does that patent do? Turns out really not too much. You surprisingly, I asked, like, can we go ahead and market this? What do you suggest? And, as long as it's patent pending, you can really move forward with it. Even if the patent is not awarded, it's not like the government slaps you on the hand and tells you to give back all your money or anything like that. They just don't do anything. And then it's up to those, if there were other people that you violated, it's kind of up to them to sue you. And so it really doesn't do much, except for I think it does. Makes those vendors or other people take you a little bit more seriously. So it does give you some credibility. You now have skin in the game, and you've taken the efforts to protect that device moving forward. But you can't really do anything with it. It's just a cool idea at this point. Next step being that if you actually want to market it, you have to go through the FDA clearance process. So sure, you've all heard 510K approval and those kinds of things. This is the kind of the pyramid of risk of different devices. So class 1 is the vast majority of devices. Those are things that don't interact with the patient really. They're exempt from any form of FDA blessing. Any medical device has to be registered with the FDA. Doesn't necessarily mean it has to be blessed by them. You get to class 2, which is the vast majority of radiation oncology devices. Some of those class 2 devices are still exempt. If they're similar enough to a different device, then you can go through the 510K process. 510K is just the name of that regulation. And so essentially you have to prove now, shoes on the other foot. At first, your device is super unique. Now it's not so unique that I can't shoehorn it in to the testing that's already been done for this other device. But it's still going to be very time consuming. And then class 3 cardiovascular devices, things like that, obviously much more risky. Those have to go through pre-market approval, which is a much more time-intensive process. So the 510K pathway, that's essentially where we are at currently. Essentially you want to try to find similar devices that have already gone through some testing so you can say we don't need to go through the whole rigmarole of proving that it's safe top to bottom. Requires mechanical testing, biocompatibility testing. The cost of it, again, can be highly variable. You have to essentially predict what the FDA is going to take issue with and then try to remedy that up front and limit the number of back and forth communications between them. And this is kind of where we're still trying to figure this out. So if anybody in the room knows, then come talk to me afterwards. But the order of operations here gets kind of complicated because you can't really pursue 510K clearance without a device. You can't have a device without the clearance. So you have to get everything in order, talk to as many people as possible, get a medical device manufacturer partnership, all of these kinds of things so that you can really assess what the risks are going to be, find out what the financial viability of all this is going to look like, and then make the next steps appropriately. So turns out it's complicated. There's a reason medical device manufacturers have huge teams that are doing this solely. Each individual piece of it is their job entirely. And for us, it feels like, we're just scratching the surface every single time. And once you scratch the surface, there's another surface underneath it. But I think with the persistence is paying off, and we're starting to see the end of the tunnel a little bit here. But it's kind of difficult to see around each corner. Determining the ultimate cost of the process is really complex, and only by some of the relationships we've built have we been able to navigate these clearly. So for me, our team, kind of lessons learned. It's okay for this progress to come in fits and starts. I think reflection and redirection and taking our wins and losses in stride and using those to kind of figure out what the best way forward is going to be. It's been really, really fruitful. As I mentioned, this has been doing my homework for this presentation, looking back and seeing all the different testing that we did and the photos and all that. It's really shocking, maybe alarming to see it went all the way back to 2019. But I think that as a result, we've been able to do this safely. Never assume, certainly, I think when it comes, I had some idea at the very beginning of the various pathways we could take to get this to a place where we could share it. And almost all of those have been wrong. And but because we've taken other people's feedback and doing our homework, we've been able to avoid some of those pitfalls before we got too long. Just try your best to look downstream. I think acknowledging your ignorance in certain places and finding the right partners is really important because they're gonna ultimately help you in the future. It's okay to shift. It's okay to build relationships, have conversations. Even if you don't move forward with them, take whatever you learned from that experience, apply it to the next one, then even circle back with them. And then also being open to critique. If it wasn't from the team at camp, the physicians I work with, this certainly would not. There would be no way for me to foresee all of the potential pitfalls. So possible to bulletproof it without getting feedback from others. And just kind of in grand summary, garage shopping ideas in radiation oncology, I think, is something that's, we're all pretty familiar with to some extent or another, whether it's using a foot bath or rice bags or whatever other off-the-shelf solution that we've used over the past many decades. It's something well within our wheelhouse, but that doesn't mean that getting them to sale is something that is time-honored tradition. The overall cost of this process really is not a super immense hurdle. If you look at what the overall cost of medical devices are in general, I think it's more the effort and the time cost that is maybe the potential barrier. Persistence is really super important. It's as I said, it's taken a long time to get here, but I think with the right time and attention and just applying the pressure, that things move forward at the right pace. So with that, thanks to the team at camp who supported this, particularly camp leadership who has provided the resources for it, and also my family who is understanding when I'm spending a long time at night testing this kind of stuff. So thanks for your all's time, and happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Kiernan?
So I have one question at least and several comments. So the first one is, are you using this under an IND or under a clinical trial, or how are you using it?
It's not under a clinical trial. No, but we do have a study going on right now looking at the comparison between this and standard electrons.
But this represents something close enough to standard of care that you don't need, you feel you don't need a clinical trial.
It's using 60 electrons with a modifier, which I think is pretty well within established treatments.
Okay. Are you doing this with the university at all? Is there any university that you could work with?
We are currently not employed by any university.
Okay, because if you can find a university partner, most of those can hold an IND. So an IND is an investigational device exemption, basically. Or it might be IDD. One's for drugs and one's for devices. I get them confused. You then have what is sort of the equivalent of a 510K. So you don't have to go through that process right away. It eliminates the cart and horse process.
Gotcha. Very good.
Okay. Other questions?
Yeah, anyone else?
Just a question about the device. It looks like maybe it's intended for that acrylic plug to be super close to the patient. Is that the idea? Or
Actually, I have a few of them here. You could pass them around. Except you can't still pass them around.
Obviously, you've thought about this a lot more than me, but my initial thought was, yeah. So the compensation or bolusing piece, whatever you want to call it, the spoiler is so far away from the patient. I'm curious what that looks like relative to like other bolusing, like more traditional bolusing methodologies, specifically for like high curvature areas. Like you talked about the nose, right? I don't know if you've seen any impact like that or.
So it turns out, I think, so the location of that spoiler is super important. I tried to play around with location of that along that tube to see if we can fix that output factor problem, because that was something I was, if I could make that better, then why not, right? But it turns out that the location of that, and even so the different diameters, the tubes are of different lengths in order to achieve that ideal depth dose distribution. So, I think for even those like highly curved areas, because of whatever's going on inside of that cone, the spoiling way upstream, those lower energy electrons are kind of drizzling out the end, so that like we've done eyelids, tips of the nose, ears, everything, and TLDs come back 1% off every single time, so.
Well, yeah. So I guess I'm more, and you did take some profiles. I'm more curious about the lateral changes in distribution as a result of like, because there's a lot of work on basically like boluses and air pockets in the boluses and like how this impacts the dose distribution. And this is kind of like flipping that on its head a little bit. So I was just curious. That's all.
I haven't done any like taken some film and wrapped it around something round and seeing what that looks like necessarily.
Did you do a lot of like phantom space where you laid the film across the patient surface or venue surface and irradiated, looking at the lateral distribution outside of the cone?
Can you still use the light field with the plastic in there?
You can, you can see straight through the acrylic. And so super easy to set up. It just is a clean little circle and really set it and forget it. So talking to the therapist about, use of it, training, I liken it to like a spot welder, right? You just put it there and it's get anything inside the cone gets the dose and then it really craters.
I'm curious about why the output factor is so low.
Yeah, I mean, it's, for that size of a circle, you're still talking about 70%, right? But not as low as 5. And so 5 to 10. So,
is the tube just longer than, it's longer than 5
it's about 105 SSD to the cone edge. So nothing tremendous.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's obviously a pretty significant spooling effect.
Just a general question. I don't know. I'm sure you mentioned this, but I forgot. What is the purpose of the spoiler? Because like I feel like there's a lot of benefit from that cone that you've created. It makes it exactly 105 every single time, so that's great. What is the benefit of the what does the dose definition look like as far as that profile? Is it sharp like that?
So that's the thing is that without that spoiler, you have especially for a 1.5 centimeter diameter cone, you have 2 millimeters of treatment width, right? It's entirely penumbra at that point. It's a point. So as soon as you put that on there, it's prescription dose edge to edge. So, and then not only that, but it's also shifting the depth dose curve up to the surface, because otherwise why not just cut a 1.5 centimeter circle?
Is there any specific reason put the spoiler on the applicator instead of surface?
I think it's kind of accomplishing. I think if you were to put it on the surface, then you still have the peaking problem, right? That's not inherently any different. You would be able to bring up the dose distribution to the surface of the skin. You would still have that peaked profile. So I think there's a utility in the actual spoiling process, the interactions that are going on within the cone. See if you the picture I showed, you actually do have a little bit of a peak around the edges. And then once you get to 2 millimeters, it's perfectly flat. So if there is a mechanism that's going on for the interactions within the acrylic to actually give you that edge to edge distribution. Because then otherwise, again, it would just be, you would just have a 2 centimeter circle and call it a day.
Back here.
Yeah, there are a lot of, it seems like a lot of parallels with some of the stuff we look at with TSE doses where we have like the beam spoiler for both like energy degradation. And then in a lot of cases you have, right, an additional acrylic sheet that you put some distance from the patient where it's really functioning primarily to help scatter electrons across a lot of angles. So part of me, I was curious to what degree you looked into this of like, how much of putting that on top is causing additional side scatter of the beam before it even makes its way through the tube. How much of that is contributing to it, the output factor being as low as it is?
I think that's significant. I think that's definitely a part of it. We don't see increased any form of unusual increased dose like lateral to the cone, right? It drops off really quickly. So the tube itself is about 3 millimeters thick, which I think is attenuating a decent amount of it. You wouldn't want necessarily, you know, if it's a hard to reach area, you wouldn't want that cone to be brushing against someone's nose or something. It would still be low dose, but not ideal. But I do think that that's a pretty significant component of it.
Take one more question.
I have a comment, but I want to use presidential's prerogative, like make it like a 2-minute comment. Is that okay?